Well, speaking of gun commerce, by the way, we had a couple stories just to wrap this up on gun sales this week. The first one was Ruger, right? Ruger had their earnings report come in, and it was not good. It was another quarter where they saw a year over year decline. I think their sales went down. This is
13%.
Yeah, and I think it's the eighth quarter in a row, maybe ninth, where they've seen declines. So their numbers are still weak as the industry is trying to find its new floor after the 2020 surge, right? You had this huge surge of gun buying in 2020 after the pandemic and the riots and everything else that was going on in the election. So much motivation for people to go out and buy guns, and millions of Americans did for the first time. But the industry since that point has seen sales continue to come down. And this is the nature of the industry, right? It's a cyclical industry, and it's both cyclical, it's seasonal and cyclical, I guess would be the right way of looking at it. Because in a given year, you're going to have more sales in the fall and the spring than you are in the summer or the middle of winter, right? And so at the same time, you also see sales move in a cycle where you have a spike and then a decline, a spike and decline. But generally speaking, after each spike, the new floor that you hit will be higher than the old one, right? They'll be higher than the highs that you saw in the previous cycle. And so that's what we've been looking for this time around. And there've been a couple times where it was like, oh, maybe this is it. Maybe that's it. And Ruger, at least, has not shown that they've hit their floor yet. Now, there's only two publicly traded gun companies, right? There's Ruger, and then there's Smith & Wesson. And so Ruger right now is not showing good numbers yet. Now, obviously, the quarter ended, I think, back in September for them. So you're not seeing the last little bit here. And that's relevant for two reasons. One, Smith & Wesson has posted its first increase in net sales in 8 quarters. That we wrote about this back in September. So they have started to see perhaps their floor kick in. Right. And the other thing, this is another story that we just wrote, is that background checks are now indicating, at least for October, which we just got those numbers in, that sales have rebounded. October saw an 8% increase in sales over the previous October. So October 2023 saw more background checks, more gun sale related background checks than October 2022. Now, we use the FBI's background check numbers as an analog for gun sales because they're the best barometer that we have. There isn't a national gun registry. The ATF doesn't track sales. They track, manufacturing, how many guns are made, but they don't track individual sales. That would be illegal under federal law. You can't have a national registry under federal law. So the closest thing we have is the background check system, where because all new gun sales have to go through licensed dealers, and licensed dealers have to perform background checks, you get a pretty good barometer of how many sales there are on a national scale or even on a state scale. But, it's not a perfect one-to-one. Excuse me, I'm all stuck. Oh my gosh. That's better. So just to wrap it up, the NICS numbers, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System numbers the FBI publishes every month are the closest thing we have to sort of sales numbers in the industry. And of course, the raw numbers aren't super reliable because they also include permit checks, and some states will actually recheck all of their gun permits. They're usually gun carry permits, but also FOID, like firearm owner identification card permits. Every month, Illinois does that. So you have hundreds of thousands of those checks that aren't actual gun sales, and they come through every month. And so the raw numbers are pretty disconnected from gun sales at this point. But the industry, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, does an analysis that removes all the permit checks, or at least as many as they can, and makes some adjustments based on, like, you can buy a gun with a permit check as well in some states instead of a sales check. So they try to factor that in. And anyway, those numbers, I think, are the most reliable barometer of gun sales. And gun sales were up in October. That's only the third month this year where you've seen a year-to-year increase. And the other two were more like it was flat. This month, you saw an 8% increase. That's significant. And it makes it the third best October on record, third behind 2020 and 2021. So better than any year before 2020. And that's significant, I think, for the first really strong indication that we've had that this is the new floor is arriving for the industry. You had the Smith & Wesson sales numbers, and you had the October background check numbers, and those are both positive signs. But at the same time, Ruger still hasn't seen that hit their numbers yet. Now that's could just be because the quarter ended before you got to October, and maybe this next quarter will be better. But definitely some interesting news there, because we've been, anyone who's been following the Reload for a while knows we talk about that. This search for a new floor in the gun industry a lot, because you had these millions of new gun owners, so your sales levels should be higher than before 2020, and they have remained higher, but they've continually slipped a little bit every year.
Right.
And so they can't, if they keep slipping and you get back down to pre-2020 levels, I think that's an indication that something has gone wrong with the industry, because they weren't able to capitalize on all these people who bought guns for the first time. And so they haven't been able to, engage them, or they've lost people in other ways. It just wouldn't make any sense. The only thing that would make sense is if you're having sales numbers that are below your pre-spike numbers, then you're not you did something wrong, because there should be just a new level of a new customer base because of what happened. So, that's what I've been watching for. And I think this is perhaps the first time we're seeing some strong evidence that, but it's one of those things where it has to, just because October had a good month doesn't necessarily mean that that's the start of a trend. That's 1 month, right? So I don't know. We'll have to keep watching for that, right?
Yeah, certainly. And the Ruger's CEO made a good point that California has sort of opened up as a potential new market because of the handgun roster restrictions, microstamping being enjoined. So, potentially this could be a little bit of a boon to the gun industry going forward to kind of counteract some of the decreases we've been seeing, because now suddenly a bunch of new handgun models are going to be available in the largest state in the country. So that could potentially be something that worth keeping an eye on and could be a buffer for the industry going forward.
Yeah, actually, I think we might be worthwhile reading out what they say they're going to start selling in California, because I think this might be news. I know that the P365 was just added to the roster in California. So as we reported on a while back, the micro stamping, the whole roster situation in California was struck down as unconstitutional. But when the state went to appeal that, they gave up on part of it. They gave up on the micro stamping aspect, which is sort of the theoretical aspect. The main reason that there aren't more guns on California's handgun roster is that micro stamping requirement, because no gun in the world would meet that requirement. It's not a real production technology. And so when they gave up on that, it opened up the door for a lot more companies to start adding some of their newer handguns to the California roster. So SIG has done it with the 365 now. Here's the list that Ruger says they're gonna bring to the rosters for anyone in California who's wondering. The Mark IV, which is a 22 pistol. You have the SR-22, which is another 22 pistol, the LCP, and the Max 9. So they're bringing a lot more of their more recent handguns to market now in California because they can add the features like a magazine disconnect and a loaded chamber indicator to those guns in order to get them on the California market. Because that's the ruling was stayed, by the way. That so even though California gave up on the microstamping, you still have to comply with the two other requirements, which is the magazine disconnect and the loaded chamber indicator. But and they have a very specific rules about the loaded chamber indicator that are different from what most other handguns have as for that feature. But regardless, that I think that actually might be some news for people there. They actually listed out the models that they're going to bring to the California market. But yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on it and see if this. I mean, these are strong signs, but they're not. It's not a guarantee that that's where things are going to end up. 2023 is still, I believe, on pace to be a slower year for gun sales than 2022 was. So they'll have to have a pretty strong end of the year to get over that hump. And part of it is, I think, and Ruger talked about this a little bit too. There's a lot of good deals now. There's a lot of sales, a lot of discounts on firearms. So, perhaps that is starting to stimulate the market a bit more at this point. People, maybe you bought your first gun and then you were like, I don't want to spend $1,000 to pick up a new handgun, or I don't want to spend so much money on ammunition, $1 a round for 9mm or whatever the crazy prices were at the peaks. And so now that the prices are coming back down, you can get guns more reasonably. Maybe people are starting to get back into that market again. But we will keep an eye on it because I think it's an important story, and it'll say a lot about how those new gun owners have really panned out. Because there's a lot of high hopes in the industry and in the gun rights movement for those folks, and we're still looking at where that has all ended up, and we're going to continue to do that.